I am excited to be joined by someone I consider to be a friend, Ken Klippenstein. Ken, I really wanted to refer to you as the Krassenstein, but I'm not going to do that to you. Welcome to the conversation. How are you, man?
I like how you did that. I'm not going to do this to you, and then you just did.
No, I love it, and it's weird. It's like we changed places a little bit. You were formerly of the Young Turks, but now you're with the Nation.com, the nation's DC correspondent, and I'm just hanging out and filling in, covering some vacancies here. But glad to have you on this episode. Your work has been phenomenal, man. And I don't say that just to flatter you. Like, you have been on the cutting edge of these Freedom of Information Act requests, and you have exposed quite a bit. Some of your most recent work, you've been discussing how Homeland Security is quietly trying to tie Antifa to foreign powers. Let's dig in there. Tell me about that report.
Yeah, so I was pretty shocked by this, and I say that as someone who's covered President Trump's Department of Homeland Security for a couple of years now. So I just when you think you've got a hold of everything and you're not going to be surprised anymore, here you go. So what was given to me from a source within Department of Homeland Security was an intelligence report that sought to tie Antifa, or I should say individuals they think are Antifa, with foreign militants. In this case, the YPG, the Peshmerga, the PKK, these are all Kurdish militant groups operating in Syria and Western Iraq. And what's interesting about that is that's what you do if you want to try to strip someone's civil liberties, someone's rights. You say, well, actually, they're acting on behalf of a foreign power. So when you take protesters, and President Trump has vowed in the past to label Antifa a terrorist organization, you can't do that to American citizens unless you're able to prove that they're acting on behalf of a foreign power.
Right, and what's interesting about that, like the groups that you said that that the Homeland Security is trying to tie them to, the United States has generally good relationships with those organizations. We've allied with them before. We've utilized their services in northern Syria in several conflicts, but it's not really any merit. It's really just a technique to undermine the movement here in the United States against police violence and the police state in general.
Yeah, you're exactly right. When you look at a lot of these Kurdish militant groups, these are the ones the U.S. was not just working with, but fighting alongside, but coordinating with. I have heard things about them providing GPS coordinates for airstrikes and things like that. So we have very, very close coordination between the U.S. So for the U.S. to come and say, "Oh, we've got these scary, questionable groups," that's really disingenuous. Perhaps President Trump believes that, because I know that it was reported recently that Trump met with the president of Turkey, Erdogan, and Erdogan told him it's sort of a smart move from his point of view, very immoral move, but smart move on Erdogan's part. He said that Antifa is connected to the Kurds. Of course, Erdogan has treated the Kurds terribly, during his time in office, as have many, Turkish leaders. But when he told Trump that, ever since then, suddenly we have, attempts to try to tie these people that volunteered to fight alongside these Kurdish groups to foreign actors. So that's very interesting. And we have, of course, the context of all this being President Trump being far more pro-Turkey, anti-Kurd than previous presidents. And actually, that was one of the reasons that Secretary of Defense Mattis is said to have resigned, was that he felt that Trump had betrayed the Kurds. So all of this provides, I think, pretty interesting context for what DHS is doing.
Right, that was one of the other issues I was going to bring up. The fact that under Trump's administration, we did essentially betray and we abandoned the Kurds after so many of them sacrificed their lives on our behalf. And so now we're coming full circle, where not only it's a foreign policy issue, some type of acquiescence to Turkey and Erdogan, but also he's going to leverage it for his own domestic purposes. I think you're doing some phenomenal reporting over there. You mentioned in your reporting Brace Belden. He's a leftist podcaster for the True Anon podcast. They actually interviewed him. What did you find out about his experiences with this situation?
So he's another one of these individuals that I would characterize as an activist, at the very least, a very left-wing person. If you look at the podcast, they're very overt about their left-wing politics. This is one example of someone that they are trying to tie to a foreign militant group that I was describing before. And what's frightening about this is if they're successful in doing so, I don't think they were. And if you look at the intelligence report, the analysts themselves sort of says, well, a lot of this is kind of thin. However, if they succeed in doing that, they're going to be able to authorize pretty frightening sorts of national security tools to be able to monitor and track these individuals. For example, they can conduct forms of electronic surveillance. They can wiretap you. They can do all sorts of things that an ordinary, resident within the United States, they're not able to do unless they're able to prove that they're acting at the behest of some foreign power. Again, I don't think that that's true. I interviewed Brace. I've known him for some time. I don't think he's taking marching orders from a group that he volunteered for years ago at some point in time. He's very overt about his politics, which seem to just be, pretty standard left-wing politics. But when you look at the attempts by DHS to try to prove this, to my mind, one of the main reasons they would do this is to be able to bring more of the tools of the national security apparatus to bear against these left-wing individuals.
Yeah. And also the chilling effect, right? So even in this reporting, right, the idea that the federal government is trying to, and Donald Trump specifically is actually trying to make good on his threat to label Antifa as a terrorist organization. I don't know how many people that's actually going to scare, but generally that seems to be the tactic of an authoritarian-leaning government. Let's shift gears to your article on how they're still trying to arrest journalists in Portland. A lot of attention has shifted slightly away from Portland since the federal agents have more or less left the region and things have gotten more peaceful. But tell me about what you're finding there.
Yeah, so what's incredible about that is that the Oregon Attorney General actually filed suit against the Department of Homeland Security. That's very unusual to have two types of feds, at source points like that. But I think the Attorney General was right to do that because you were having instances of repeated tear gases to journalists. Not just that, launching of tear gas canisters at demonstrators' faces, which they call them non-lethal. Is a better term for it. Is less lethal. That's actually another term and more accurate one, I think, because you can't actually, unfortunately, kill people with these things if they're not used properly. They're supposed to be shot, in the vicinity or at people's feet. They're not supposed to be launched at people's physical persons. And in one case, they ended up shattering this poor guy's skull, and he ended up having to get reconstructive surgery for it. So I think that the Oregon Attorney General was right to sue DHS. And then the ACLU ended up filing suit along with them. And what they ended up succeeded in doing was getting a restraining order placed against DHS that sort of prevented some of the worst practices from happening. But as a source within DHS and the documents that this person furnished to me shows is that that improvement was pretty limited. So DHS quickly took to disseminating a law enforcement sensitive document. That's a term that means they can't disseminate it outside of their agency without getting in pretty serious trouble. And what this document showed was it kind of coached them on the legality of what they're able to get away with after this restraining order. And it kind of told them, you can still expose journalists to tear gas and crowd suppressants. It just has to be incidental is the sort of euphemism that they use. So you can't literally target them, or if you do, say that it was an accident. And I think that DHS, and I know my sources tell me this too, they know what that means when you say incidental. It's kind of a wink and saying, well, make sure you don't say it was intentional if something like this comes out. So I'm not saying it wasn't good that the Attorney General filed suit and that the finding wasn't constructive, but it doesn't go far enough, I don't think.
I find your reporting particularly refreshing because of your sourcing, because of your approach, right? You have quite a few reveals, breaking news that you get. Are you finding in this approach a gap, right? Is there a gap that you're feeling that just other reporters are not going through this due diligence? And I'm kind of moving away from like the substance of your reporting and more to like the culture of reporting in general. Do you find that the lane for you to have all of these scoops is a result of a gap in journalism in general, or is it just so niche that no one else was paying attention to it?
100%, Ben. And what I'm struck by again and again is when I have these stories, there's no shortage of public interest. There's this misconception, I think, where it's like, oh, there's just no demand. The general public has such low taste; they wouldn't appreciate these kind of things. We've got to just give them, entertainment, reality shows, this kind of thing. None of which I'm against, by the way. But that's just not true that they don't want to learn about these things. Because whenever I have one of these stories that performs, I can tell you from the internal numbers on our site, performs very well. Judging from the sources that reach out to me subsequent to it, either inspired by the disclosures within these stories or feeling moved to action to do something about it, there's a great deal of public concern, both within the institutions and among the general public. So unfortunately, I think that it is a lane that's been left open voluntarily. By it's an elective thing that people decide not to cover it. I mean, we could go into the institutional problems. Certainly, it's easier for me at the Nation, I think, to cover some of this stuff than it might be for people in other institutions. But a lot of it is voluntary, and it's really disappointing. I mean, for me, it's great because I get all these scoops now, and I have no competition to do it. But for the society, unfortunately, we don't benefit. I'd much rather everyone be not looking at say the treatment of protesters in this case, or but there's this tendency to just the echo chamber. They'll focus on whatever it is CNN or what's on the front page of the New York Times, which they can do good work, but that's not all that's going on. There's much more to it than what's on the front page of the Times.
Ken Klippenstein is the Nation's DC correspondent. He's worked for senior investigative reporter for TYT Investigates and the Daily Beast. How are your brothers doing? No, I'm joking. Hey man, I love your work. Keep doing what you're doing. Thanks so much for your time, man.
Great to be with you, Ben. Take care.
Take care.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.